everyone. My name is Roby Hyde, and I'm a solutions engineer for Flatfile. I've been with the company for about 3 years, and today I get to show off Flatfile. And I'm excited for you to see our product and our platform and some of the amazing features of Flatfile. As this title slide shows, this is going to be a live demo. We're going to real quickly walk through an agenda to talk about Flatfile itself and how our customers are typically using Flatfile, and then we'll jump into the live demo. So when we start thinking about what is Flatfile, often it's a good thing to start talking about what is a data exchange in the first place, because what Flatfile does is it helps you exchange data from one place to another. And typically, this starts with data from any source or any format, any type of data file you have. Oftentimes, these data files may have issues with them, bad data, missing data, field names are the wrong name, they're in the wrong order, whatever, right? We want to be able to get this data in, exchange it, and give it back to you in a way that your backend has clean data to work with. So Flatfile really helps to process this data, clean it up, and move it from input to output. And that's really what we think of when we talk about data exchange. Now, there's generally 4 parts of this data exchange workflow. Obviously, the first thing we need to do is get the data in, right? So we collect this data or import this data into Flatfile, and we look for the data inside the file, right? And once we've identified or extracted the data from the file, then we need to map it. And by mapping it, what we're talking about here is aligning the fields. So on the input file, again, the field names may be using the incorrect names or out of sequence. So we need to find a way to help the user line up those input fields to the output fields so that they are the correct fields, or basically the data is going into the correct fields on the back end. So that mapping exercise, we want to try and automate that as much as possible, make it easy for the end user to accomplish correctly, so that then when they continue on, we are able to import that data and do the data validation. Now, data validation is really where you can insert code on the back end to come up with validation rules and logic for these different fields. And it could be simple things like just making sure that a field is a certain length or uppercased or title cased or something like that. Or you could have very complex validations that are maybe an API call that goes out to your backend server to validate that this particular field value is allowable. So all sorts of different validations like that could be done. And then finally, we put this data in a format that's available to you to egress out of Flatfile, right? Or to export out of Flatfile. And this conversion process might mean it's a JSON file. It might mean it becomes an Excel workbook. It becomes something else that your backend system needs. And we have lots of ways that you can kind of move that file out of Flatfile into the destination of your choosing. All right, so these are the 4 primary steps. And that helps us understand what Flatfile is, because what Flatfile does is provide you with the software tools to build something like this. So we think of ourselves more like a developer toolkit, if you will, or an SDK that allows you to build these data exchange platforms. So we're code first, developer driven, API first. We really want you to have the power of using the code to create an excellent data exchange experience. We also, though, want to make sure that whatever you build, your end users are able to use this in a wonderful experience, right? So we pay a lot of attention to this intuitive end user interface. Everything is themable with CSS. You can make this look the way you want it to look. And also the process that the users go through, the end users go through, should be very user-friendly and easy to follow. So we're trying to provide a tool that gives you the power from a developer's perspective, but also the ease of use and intuitiveness for the end user. Okay, so because Flatfile is obviously dealing with data, since we're importing this data through Flatfile, We recognize that oftentimes this data is not just your data, but it may be your customer's data. So you need to feel confident that Flatfile can correctly handle this data. Um, we have spent a lot of time making sure that our platform is enterprise scale and ready for very complex data types as well as very secure data types. We are SOC 2 Type 2 compliant, for example, also HIPAA, GDPR, EU, US Privacy Shield compliant. All of the data is encrypted end to end as well as at rest. And we really pay a lot of attention to making sure that our infrastructure is up to your needs. So definitely something to be thinking about is where your data is going as you're going through a data exchange. And Flatfile provides you with that safe environment to do so. Great. So now let's talk about how users typically implement Flatfile or how they use Flatfile. And there's several different ways that you could use Flatfile. It's a very flexible toolkit. So many different types of workflows could be built with Flatfile. Probably one of the most common ones is this one we see on the left where you want Flatfile to be part of your application. You want to have a button in your application to just launch an importer that allows the user to import data. You don't need a lot of multiple workflows or multiple users or things like that. A very simple import process, but you need to have that look exactly like you want it to because it's living inside of your application. So that embedded experience is certainly one of the most common ways we see Flatfile, and we'll actually do that as part of the demo today. Flatfile is capable of handling much more complex projects, though. And by complex projects, let's think about situations where we might have multiple users that need to provide various parts of the data for an overall project. So we have this concept now of a collaborative environment where we're inviting multiple users in to provide us their components of data. And we're also validating one user's data against another user's data and coming up with different rules around how that should work. Again, a very flexible workflow is required here. So using code to come up with that workflow that makes it possible for your users to accomplish what they're trying to do. And then finally, there could be quite large projects, right? Imagine a system migration, for example, where you need a lot of orchestration of the workflow and the data. Again, Flatfile provides you with the tools necessary to do that with our API and with our code-based development process. You can create a very custom workflow that's quite complex as well. So we'll take a look at some of these in the actual demo. But I want you to think about, Flatfile itself here as a tool that you can use to build the ideal data exchange or importer or integration or whatever you want to think of it as. And this really allows you, the bottom line of Flatfile is it allows you to create this experience and to get data into your backend system faster with less errors, reducing the manual cost of fixing up this data. And then also, of course, making sure that your backend has this nice clean data that can be imported directly into your backend. So that's really what Flatfile is designed to do. And I'd like to show you kind of how that works. So let's go ahead and jump into a demo real quick. Okay, to begin this demo of Flatfile, this page here is an example of perhaps your existing application. This is just a web page with a button on it. And this button currently, is saying import data. This could be whatever button you have in your application that users would click on to start that import process. So when we go ahead and click on this, we can see that Flatfile is going to load into your web page in an iframe. In this case, we see a modal iframe. This could also be non-modal so that you can make it fit into the flow of your application. Once the iframe is loaded up, we want the user to be able to enter data in many different ways so that it can be flexible for them. They can pull in data from perhaps a Google Sheet, or they can manually type in the data, or they can upload a file. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and grab a file that I've got and drag and drop that onto our importer. Now, we mentioned that the second step in the workflow process is this mapping exercise. And really, this is intended to be very quick for the user to simply review the fact that we have aligned all the fields. And the way this works is on the left, we see all the fields that are in the document that I just dropped onto the importer. And on the right are all of the fields that we've defined that we're expecting to see come in on an importer. So here we can see that I've correctly mapped all of these input fields to the expected fields in our schema. And at this point, the user just kind of looks through this to confirm we've got it all lined up. If there is any issues, they can always override what we're suggesting, but we want our suggestions to be accurate enough so that the user simply reviews this and confirms that it's all correct. Now, when we move on, if there are any fields that have specific enum or category values in them, then we'll go ahead and break this out as a separate function where we map those values. So in this case, in the deal status field, we can see that there are several values that are coming in. We just want to give the user the opportunity to make sure that those are correctly lined up and lined up with the data that we have. So in this case, if this is a perhaps new, then we'll go ahead and set it as that, so that when we continue on, the data will come in and be mapped to those correct enums. And now that the data has come into our spreadsheet, we've run that validation step. And that validation step is a lot of code on the back end that you can customize to check the validity of each of these fields or even fields related to each other. And the goal here is to give the user the ability to fix this data in a easy to use way. So in this case, we see we have 437 records that we've imported, but quite a lot of them are invalid. So to help the user clean up this data, we do things like color coding the data. So this indicates that this is an error. And in this case, as we hover over it, we see that this email already exists in our database. So perhaps this is a situation where these users have already been uploaded and we don't certainly want to have additional or a duplicate record loaded in. So as the user at this point, I'm like, okay, if these three are already existing, let me just go ahead and delete those so we don't want to have any duplicates in our backend database. And there's a delete button here that we can click to delete those three records. Now that those records are deleted, we can see that our invalid count is dynamically changing. And we also have some other tools here that we can give the user to help them clean up this data. So a few things. First off, we see that we've got a required name field that's missing, right? And we've got the ability to also give yellow warnings, which are not really invalid records, but they're letting the user know that there's a problem here that we'd like them to fix. And in this case, we're just looking for something to be in one field or the other here. Okay. Let's scroll over a little bit and take a look at this data. We see that we've got lots of errors in this country column. And in this case, if we hover over this, we can see that the reason why is that we were expecting 2-character country codes to come in. And as a user, perhaps I wasn't aware that you were expecting 2-character country codes. So in my file that I dropped in, I have it all spelled out. Now, generally, this would be a really difficult thing for the user to recover from. Perhaps they would go back to their Excel spreadsheet, change those to 2-character country codes, and then re-import them. But we do have some powerful editing tools inside of Flatfile to help. So if the user simply goes up here, they can select to find and replace. And in this case, I want to say, well, I'm going to look for all United States and replace those with US. And so immediately, once that change is made throughout our set of data, we can see that we've dramatically reduced the number of invalid records at this point. So we have these editing capabilities, and there's quite a few of them that you can use to kind of help you edit things out. We also have built in a powerful AI engine to help the user. And when you start thinking about what does an LLM AI system inside of a spreadsheet look like, there's quite a few things that you can do with it. So in this case, we'll use AI to go ahead and convert these Canada entries over to the 2-character country code as well, just so you can see how that works. So I'm going to come over here to this AI transform button. And when we go into this mode, the data is kind of shown to us in a preview mode. So this is just a preview of the data as it might exist when AI transforms something, right? So since this is AI, general English is fine. We don't need to get very specific. We do offer some field callouts here, but in this case, we probably just can be able to do something like this. If the country field contains Canada, replace that with CA. And we'll go ahead and hit enter. So now the AI is going to try and interpret what I said and show me what it thinks it's supposed to do based on what I said. And so if we scroll over here, we can see that, first off, I can show only the modified data. So it kind of filters out everything except for these records that are going to be changed. And we can see here that it has correctly identified the fact that we want to replace all Canada with CA. And now that I'm confident that the AI has understood me, I'm going to say transform that data. And now it'll actually go through and clean up those records. Okay. So now we're down to 7 invalid records. And to find the rest of these, instead of scrolling through, let me just filter by errors. And in this case, we can see that we've got 6 records that don't have a first name field. And sure enough, we see that those are all required. Now, at this point, it might be a simple matter of just making sure that those correct first names are put in there. And we can see that as we're putting first names in, they're disappearing from the list of invalid records. So we'll put some first names in here. Okay, so now that we've got first names in there, our validators are working on this and determining that all of those are now valid. They've been removed. I'm going to clear our filter by error. So now we can see that while we still have 7 invalid records, we do not have any first name issues anymore. So the rest of these are all deal status issues. And the deal status column is our enum column, right? So these are simply missing something that's required, and these are drop downs. So we can just make sure that we've got those drop down meetings populated. Okay. We'll do something like this just to make sure we clear all of our errors. Now, it's not necessary to clear all the errors. In fact, I'll go ahead and leave a couple of invalid records here just so we can kind of see how this looks. So but at this point now, I've got 432 valid and 2 invalid records. So we can still move forward with invalid records, but we do want to make sure that the user is comfortable with this data before they move on. So again, we're trying to give them the tools necessary to clean it up. So a couple of other things in this UI here that I want to call out before we move on. We have this concept of ability to do different actions. So if you want to give your users the ability to initiate some custom action, you can do that in this spreadsheet. For example, maybe there's a stock email that we want to send out to some of these users. I can go in here and I can just simply select who I want to send these emails to. Since these records have an email address, I can simply hit the send email button. And now that custom action has performed and the emails have been sent. So it's easy to build these custom actions, just like the validations that we're building behind the scenes to do all the validations of the data. We can build code behind each of these actions to go off and do something specific. So you've got that ability to create custom actions as well. All right. So lastly over here, I want to show you that there's another feature here that's really handy, especially when you're dealing with some more complex sets of data. And that is the ability to have multiple schemas inside of an importer. So in this case, we have our contacts that we've loaded data up into, but I've also got a separate table of cost centers. And I preloaded this when we created this iframe. So it dynamically loaded in all of the cost centers for my business. So now I want to have the user have the ability to associate cost centers with each contact. So on the right over here, we can see that I've got a cost center ID. This is a drop-down menu, and when I click on it, it pulls dynamically the list of cost centers from the cost center sheet. And then as I select a cost center, it will go out and grab the name of that cost center and populate that, very much like an Excel VLOOKUP function would perform. Okay. So by doing this, you can see immediately that you can start to create a relational database inside of Flatfile. We can have lots of different schemas in here, each one linked to each other with some sort of unique identifier. And that way you could start to build out complex data sets. And that gives you a lot of power because instead of trying to import everything all at once, you can have these imports happen with each schema receiving its own set of data. Excellent. All right, so now that we have all this data, I want to go ahead and show you that this is also available in another use case, and that is the concept of instead of it being embedded, we could also have this collaborative portal or collaborative project that we can invite people into. Let me just go ahead and submit this data here, and we've got a little confirmation box, and we'll go ahead and submit the data, okay? Even though we had 2 invalid records, we're still able to submit the data. As a developer on the back end, I can determine what I want to do with that invalid data, whether I process that or not, or send it back to the user. Lots of different possibilities there. But I want to go back to my dashboard now. So the dashboard is an application that you can log into. And when you log into the dashboard, you can see all of the information that has been imported. So we see all of the importers that we've brought in this environment. And if I click on this one here, this is the one we just started with. We can see all the exact data that was there before. We still have our 2 invalid records, but I'm looking at this now from the context of an administrator on the back end. And as such, I have the ability to see all the same data, make edits to this, do whatever I want to with the data as if I was the user importing the data in the first place. So that's fantastic. It gives me the ability to have perhaps a business administrator going through a review process with the data that's been uploaded, making some final changes, doing something else here with that data. But I can also create these projects from scratch over here in my dashboard. And if I go to my projects tab, I can simply come up here and create a new project. And we're just going to call this a demo project. And now we see that this interface, as it loads in, looks very similar to the iframe, except we also have this left-hand navigation. Now, this left-hand navigation can be toggled on or off, but there's some interesting things in this left-hand navigation that might be useful to have. First off, keep in mind now this is a URL that you can actually provide people to log in. We can manage guests, so you can specify who has access to this project. They'll receive an email that invites them into the project, and you can control who has access through this manage guests interface. But we also can see that we've got what we call a getting started page here. And these are just documents that allow you to build welcome text, or perhaps it's a step-by-step example of how you could enter data into this spreadsheet or importer. But these getting started documents are nice just to create for your users. And then we also see our standard interface here for the importer. And again, this is the exact same importer we used in an iframe. It's just now coming in as a project, a multi-user collaborative project. So hopefully this gives you an example of how these 2 use cases can be put together in Flatfile. There's a lot of power in these 2 different use cases, and they represent the most common use cases we see in our customers that are using Flatfile. I'd like to go ahead and wrap this demo up, though, and thank you for your attention and your time as you saw Flatfile and have now seen this live demo of Flatfile. And we're eager to hear from you if you have any questions or want to reach out to us to explore how Flatfile could be used in your business. Thank you very much.